name is Nicholas Kuna, and I'm going to be running a series of podcasts on brand strategy and digital marketing. If that wasn't exciting enough for you, we've got some of the best guests in the world who are going to tell us some of their wins, some of their biggest fails, and some tips and tricks they wish they knew when they started out on their journey. So if you're in marketing or sales or anything to do with communications, this is the podcast for you, and I look forward to having you join us.
Come chat with Nicholas. He'll listen to you, then he'll laugh, and then he'll cry with you. It's all in a safe space for you to speak your truth. Oh, come and chat with Nick.
Shehara De Silva, what a pleasant surprise, and thank you for making time to chat to me tonight. I know it's quite late where you are. So where in the world are you right now?
I'm in Australia, of all places. It's lovely to connect after all these years.
It is, yes. And I think we first connected in Sri Lanka, which is your country of origin.
Yes, it is, very much so.
And a country I love very much, but has been going through a bit of a tumultuous time at the moment. So I'm sure you're happy to be in Australia.
Yes, it seems to be a sort of perpetual condition, at least for the since independence almost.
Yeah. So quite tough, and you've worked with a whole raft of companies in Sri Lanka, and I think you're a board member on a couple of organizations. But one of the boards that you were on that really excites me was the Arthur C. Clarke board. I'm sure that was a little while ago, but I enjoy his books, but he was a bit of a naughty fellow if I've read my read my history. But he had a very strong relationship with Sri Lanka. But anyway.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man, and I think he saw a lot of the future. He predicted satellites, and he had a great vision for the future. I'm not too sure he was that naughty, I mean, at the end of it was his sexuality, but which is not considered that naughty these days.
No, I'm sure, but I think at the time he might have had a little bit of pressure. But yes, fantastic visionary. And I'm watching a program on Apple at the moment, which is Foundations,
right,
which is one of the short stories that he wrote, which has been turned into serialized. Shehara, I think it might be good to get a quick overview of who is Shehara, and a little bit of your background, because you've done so much, and I'm a big fan of yours, and we've had a couple of intersections in our life in terms of works. I've worked at the largest HIV prevention organization in SA. You work have done quite a lot of work in HIV. We were both managing directors at Interbrand, and have a very strong or big branding background. But can you go into a little bit of your background, sort of how did that turn you into Shehara of today, and what are the exciting things that you're working on now, and what is taking you to not Tashkent, you're going to Samarkand, which most people haven't heard of, and I'm super excited and super jealous. So please, just a bit of a life story, if you don't mind.
So I think I must be some kind of a gypsy in many ways, because even at the grand old age of 64, which I am now, I still seem to be in a continuous state of flux. I think I have so many different interests that I could, write my CV many which ways in terms of my interests and my experience. But to give you a kind of a short snapshot of it, I sort of worked my way through university doing a bit of journalism and broadcasting, and I was almost full-time on broadcasting. I produced feature programs and all for the local radio station in Sri Lanka, and I did a degree in archaeology. So the media, that sort of thing, which I began just because I needed some money to take me through university, because I had lost my parents. Oscar Wilde would say it's careless to lose both parents, but yeah, I did. By the time I was 19, I had both my mum and dad had passed on. My mum was someone from the media. She was an advertising journalist, very, very talented woman. as was my dad. He was an intellectual and a national chess player and stuff like that. So having had that kind of intellectual background, I sort of just wandered off into university, but decided to be a maverick and did archaeology and philosophy as a student of one, really, because I found some clause in our constitution that allowed me to do it in English, which is not technically not my native language, but I would say it is my mother tongue because it's the language I think and speak in, really, as did my parents. Anyway, to move on, I then got into advertising somehow, which again, I suppose it was in my blood because Mum had been doing that as I left university. And I was also doing a master's in archaeology. But then, being a bit idealistic, I was upset with some of the work that UNESCO was doing towards cultural heritage conservation, and I felt that there were things that were being done really with the archaeology department which I wasn't comfortable with. I felt they were destroying certain aspects of our past, and so I went into the rat race. And there I began a career very much in marketing, branding, advertising, that sort of thing. And I did that for, I had quite a good career path, in the sense I sort of ended up, by the time I was 29, running Fonterra's milk food as marketing director, and possibly the youngest woman or youngest marketing director at that time in a multinational in Sri Lanka, be it a man or a woman. And then we went off, my husband and I, by this time I'd married, and we went off to Malaysia. And I thought I'd go to film school and do that kind of stuff, and to be a mother because I had a baby. But along the way I got bored pretty fast, literally before the 6 months of maternity leave, and I wanted to get back into the rat race. And I got a leg up initially, actually, through my husband, who suggested to his ad agency, I think my wife is more intelligent than me. Can you just try and find her something to keep her occupied and out of my hair? So anyway, I ended up with DDB Needham and that group, the local agent there. And then by the time, 5 years on, when we were moving back to Sri Lanka, I got a really good break because I think I had done very well in my career. Frankly, when I first was asked in Malaysia to be an account director or head of planning or do some work in planning, I had to reach out to one of my friends and say, can you send me a JD? I'm not too sure what this is all about. But by the time I had left, I think because we won Malaysia's first regional accounts for Mobil, the oil and company. We had won Hasbro and Cadbury Schweppes. And so we were on a winning wicket in terms of pitching and winning most of our pitches. And I was leading strategy. And we also won the Tourism Malaysia account, which turned out to be very successful and has gone into a lot of, it's considered a classic. As I think was the rewriting of Hasbro's playbook for Play-Doh. And then I came back and many years later, about 5-6 years later, I had another sort of roadblock in my life where my husband fell seriously ill and I needed to get out and earn a little more money to put the kids through college and stuff like that. So I reached out to the same group and they said, well, if you want, we'll give you 2 weeks, come back and we'll give you a PR company to run. It was again one of those issues where I said, I'm not too sure I know anything about PR, barely know how to spell it, and they said, I'm sure you'll wing it, come along. And it turned out to be another very successful run. We did some very interesting work with trying to save the rhino in Sarawak, and we did a lot of political work. I did the mice and medical tourism for Malaysia subsequently after my time, but it ended up being number one, I think, in the whole region when they were nowhere in play. So some of those are considered successes. And then Volkswagen came in and we were handling that, as you know, which is one of those lovely accounts to handle, fun accounts.
Yeah.
And Then Interbrand was coming into Malaysia, and they connected up with DDB, and I was asked to run the initial thing, and I ran it for just over a year or so. We were again chosen as #1 in strategy in Malaysia by the time I left. So by this time I was doing sort of group strategy for Rap Collins, for DDB PR and the advertising, which was then called Naga DDB. Plus they were in publishing and various things like that. So I was group strategy head. And I'd moved on to do Interbrand, but I just did it for a little over a year and I moved on. And eventually I came back. And then I decided that I wanted to help my country, which needed some help. So I did a sort of different change in my career, and I went into government to try and help the Board of Investment restructure. There was some hope at that time. The war was still going on. We've had a sort of 30-year war. But we were really trying and build peace, and we were also trying to, because there was a transitional moment where there was a peace treaty and stuff like that. So I did that on a 2-year contract. I went into banking, and I got more into sort of, on the marketing end of it rather than the communication end.
Yeah.
And after that, I set up my own business, and I started doing. Increasingly, I wanted to work more into sort of social impact and stuff like that. So I started doing development consultancy, and I did various consultancies there. So that's where the kind of mixed experience comes in, having worked both in the marketing end, in the advertising and communication end, and then I've done a full circle to use some of those skills for behavior change communication. So that's when there was more of the, working with the, right across the Commonwealth with HIV. And right now I'm sitting on various boards, about 9 of them. Uh-huh. Three of them at least are in the, sort of social impact areas. One's in reconciliation and peacemaking. The others was in environment, and the third is microfinance, which is also looking now at regenerative agriculture and has a unique model. It's one of the most interesting models, owned by a charity, pro-poor, but running a commercial enterprise as a microfinance institute. So as you can see, I'm all over the place.
Yeah. Is that all?
Bits and bobs, I've cut out bits. But
well, this is why, again, we haven't chatted in a while, but it's when I was just, again, reading through your bio and the type of work that you're doing, it's so exciting, and I think the impact that you've had through these various organizations will be felt over the years and hopefully far into the future. But it must be very frustrating having great ideas and them not being implemented well. So I think maybe we can chat a little bit about dealing with frustration in terms of because marketing and communications often are put as a plaster over bad planning or bad strategy. And one of the challenges we as marketers have is that it's seen as a panacea or a cure-all. We'll just do some PR, we'll just do some marketing, but the actual organization isn't structured to really deliver what it's done. So I think that's a common struggle for marketers, where we've got great ideas, we can make things work, we've got great concepts, but the people involved or the structures aren't set up for success. So I think that's typically a challenge that we would face. But in the current work that you're doing now, because you're traveling quite a bit, I think over the next month. What are some of the exciting things? Not keeping you up at night, but waking you up in the morning. So what is giving you joy in the morning when you wake up at the moment now?
Well, right now, like I'm sort of semi-retired in some ways, or I keep telling myself that. My kids would laugh and say, "Well, we don't necessarily notice that," but I am. So I'm trying to trying to do systems change more and more, because you're right, the frustration of implementation has always been there. And as an anecdote, because we're still talking as communication people, maybe I should tell you when I left Malaysia the first time, because of some of the way I handled my strategy component, there was I sort of insisted on being the head of client servicing for the critical accounts, because I wanted to sell it through. I feel sometimes you get lost in translation in these structures, right? So there was a deep dependence on the strategy person with the client, because it's important to have that trust. So by the time I wanted to leave, they kept me on payroll at what then was very interesting. I was on a nice dollar pay, living out in Sri Lanka at a much lower cost of living.
Yeah.
And actually with no brief other than to be available for the odd call. And that was fine initially, but then I think my sense of, which has always been there, that you can end up being, dare I say, an absolute bullshitter in this game if you want to be, or you really believe and you're passionate about trying to make a difference in whatever you're doing, building brands or creating new markets. So I actually reached out finally and said, you know what, I can't handle this deal anymore. Let's keep the fact that I am leaving on a high. And if I ever need, I'll try and contact you again. But please, you've been very generous with me, but I must bail out of this way. You just keep me on payroll. I send you documents occasionally and someone else sells it through. Because I felt I would lose my credibility. Yeah. Because things get lost in translation, and that's where a dog becomes a camel or something else, right? By the time clients and other interface, people, client servicing, they agree on various modifications, which can take the soul out of an idea or the legs out of it. Because ideas are one thing, but if it's not kind of campaignable and it doesn't have the legs to walk through into the different customer touch points and the different interfaces in a customer journey, it's problematic.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing now increasingly is really, so I did a very interesting document, which is a playbook on reconciliation for media, for the outgoing, well, now he's back again as Prime Minister, the Prime Minister and the President, to try and handle reconciliation and messaging, both with the citizens and the media, but actually to try and build confidence with particularly, so Sri Lanka had an ethnic war where the Sinhalese and Tamils were, and it was a majoritarian Sinhala regime, and the Tamils didn't feel secure.
Yeah.
So there needed to be proper messaging and a whole transitional justice strategy in terms of reconciliation and memory and perhaps even reparation.
Yeah.
But these guys, again, just didn't understand. They really didn't know why they had to be on the same sort of songbook. So it's been frustrating, but I know lots of younger people and a lot of people in the system have taken bits and pieces of it, which is good. These things are there to be copied and plagiarized and taken any old way. So that helps, but the problem with behavior change communication quite often is it's a long haul, because you're trying to make, shift cultures, attitudes, ingrained beliefs, prejudice. It's not easy, but it's something I'm now quite passionate about. Use many motives as possible and get back into, understanding the cultural nuances at a deep level. So this is going way beyond 30-second ads and, few placements on hoardings and that sort of thing. It's much more immersive.
Well, if you've looked at the news in South Africa at the moment, we're going through a bit of a transition phase as well. So I think perhaps that playbook should be circulated in South Africa as well, because very similar sort of setup as Sri Lanka. Civil war, the border war for 30 years, etc. And the two, the majority was oppressed, and then you've got the you had the apartheid government, and there's still some festering wounds, things that haven't been communicated, and then obviously new players trying to take advantage of mass unemployment and poor government management. So it's so unfortunate. It's a recurring theme throughout history as well. And I think documents like yours are quite important to sort of set the structures, and hopefully, and again, it's a time-based thing. It takes time. It's not an overnight process. And very frustrating. So, but on that point then, because this can take us back to the marketing discussion, with AI and all of this new exciting technology that's coming out, graphic designers, copywriters are almost are worried about their roles. And I think advertising agencies as well, and brand agencies, are also worrying about where their next paycheck's coming from. And your discussion on strategy, the importance of the strategic role, I think is where ad agencies, brand agencies, digital agencies will need to focus their attention on in the future. The content-wise, creating pretty pictures, creating messaging that targets your audience, I think it can be done automatically now, basically. But the strategy in terms of tying it to business objectives, in terms of societal objectives, and so on, is where the strategist comes in. And I think all of the large agencies I've been at, it's very funny that you said you studied archaeology, because they typically get philosophy and archaeology graduates because they think differently and have a very broad perspective. So I think that's where the arts are still useful, and how that move from archaeology and philosophy, it's a natural segue into strategy, because you have this big picture view and can remove it from sort of the petty day-to-day thinking that people have. So strategists, I think, still have a tremendous role in agencies, and should be, and I think that is a role in the future that is not going to disappear anytime soon.
I agree, but I think where the displacement is not so much the chat GPTs and all. Maybe so some of the copy people, and there will be sometimes a computer that can generate responses, or the kind of call center stuff that's going on, or letter writing and handling and all will be kind of, a lot of it will be templated and done. Where I think strategists themselves, or anyone in the ad business, has to be much more aware is of how data and technology informs. Somewhere along my way I got pretty interested in technology too, and I've been helping a lot of fairly large startups, and one of them was a company called Emojot, which was it's the first company in the world that started to, it's Sri Lankan owned but Silicon Valley based, that decided to not look at, usually it's IBM, Watson, it was language kind of things that work on search and that sort of thing, right? But they started looking at emojis as because they found that both Facebook, Twitter, people were saying that these interaction is, people will respond more with with some kind of an emoji pictogram, but using that to kind of get real-time geolocated, even global responses on stuff. And it had the capacity, like Facebook, almost to have a timeline memory of all your responses and aggregate and find at a big data level, anonymized, but it could aggregate. So it'll know that Nicholas is, he has I don't know, he likes red meat, but he might at the same time like this particular type of music, and he like this. And it comes into a very almost personalized, but also it profiles you in terms of just trying to figure out within your age and your sex and your location and various things of your journey, everyday journey. So it doesn't know you as Nicholas perhaps, but it knows a lot about you. And that's how they handle some of the data privacy issues. But then they're able to really get to a level on your customer journey and know that aperture moment, what might be the way they have to message it to you as opposed to me or somebody else. And some of this becomes much more customized, and it may not be a one-size-fits-all kind of mass thing that people like us at one time were trying to move, entire, different markets sometimes, nuanced a bit, but not to this level.
Yeah.
And I think we have to grapple with these sort of things, that you can't necessarily do big campaigns, but there are things that override. So you have to find those things that have meaning across cultures and demographics and things like that. And it could be sports, or it could be a Barbie movie, or whatever it is. Some of them are age-old tricks, but whichever way, you have to find ways in which you can get under people's skin at the right timing.
Yeah, well, I think and if I think back to it, and that's the last time we met, I think, is when you were running that or working with them closely in Sri Lanka. And it's about semiotics, so it's signs and meaning. And I think the growth in semiotics, I had a chat with the wonderful founder of a semiotics company. And I think in this age of AI, where all of the basic communications, written communications, and sort of is quite templatized, like you say, I think the understanding of semiotics is going to play an increasing role and be a way that we can, again, personalize those experiences or not have AI involved as much, because the meanings in images and words and things like that, beyond what a machine can have a look at, is what sort of makes us more useful or more creative than computers. So I think that would be a separate discussion on semiotics and how useful that could be and how we can keep some jobs. But I think a lot of these jobs, my classes start again at the end of this month, and I'm going to be talking to my students about the impact that AI is going to have on their roles. And don't worry about your job. We've got to understand systems, structures, and lifelong learning. So if I think about in my great-grandfather, who was actually in advertising as well, they had sign writers. So they had to, when they did a sign, it was a painted sign. That job is no longer around. We can print it out on Canvas, or you can do it on Photoshop, etc., and print it out. So you don't have to have a technician who knows how to paint a straight line and get the paint correct and so on. So the same thing with certain types of copywriting and graphic design now. That is a skill that is no longer necessary. You don't need to be able to draw a straight line. Ask the computer to draw a straight line. It allows us to do more interesting, more useful things, and that's my hope, is that this will just take away. We need to, keep moving forward, and I think we need to take advantage of the new technologies that confront us and get the best value out of them. Shehara, we could talk all night and all day, and there are tons of subjects we can discuss. But I think for a first shot, this was quite good. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll probably have a chat a little bit later in terms of I need to see photographs of Samarkand and understand
most
some of the work.
Most certainly.
Yeah.
We're doing Kyrgyzstan too. Supposed to have the most phenomenal Islamic architecture, right?
Yeah.
So I'll come and tell you all about it in the Silk Route that I'm going to travel.
Awesome. Very exciting.
Take care.
Thank
Good
you
luck.
so much.
Bye-bye. Bye.
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 Come chat with Nicholas. He'll listen to you. Then he'll laugh and then he'll cry with you. It's all in a safe space for you to speak your truth.